It's the Craggy Rugby podcast. It's the midweek edition prior to the Leicester game for the last 16 of the Challenge Cup. We've got an extra guest on today, so we'll have three guests. We've got William Davis.
Good evening.
Lindley McKenzie.
Good evening, all.
And Danny Deegan.
How's it going?
As usual, we'll jump into the highlights of the press conference. Who was there today, William?
Yeah, well, the player was Paul Boyle, who we've spoken to a number of times, but slightly different. Two coaches today, Andy Friend and Nigel Carolan, who is leaving at the end of the season after 26 years in Connacht. So it was an interesting press conference. It's a different feel, Europe, and you're into the knockout stages now. It's winner takes all. What's the general view of Leicester?
Yeah, well, if you look at Leicester kind of from an old school point of view, I suppose they're similar to Munster back in the day in that they're a big, heavy pack and they try and bully you, but they do have a little bit more subtlety to their play now as well. They've a couple of really good backs, so I suppose they're going to threaten us in a lot of different ways, but the main threat is definitely going to be up front, so we're going to have to man up front and not let them try bully us and go right back at them.
And overall, what are you looking for? Obviously, out of this game, you want to win, but what do you need to produce to get that? The last three games, they've all tight losses, but winning is a great habit. You need to get back on that horse. Yeah,
it's an 80-minute performance, what we're looking for. Like, I suppose if you look at maybe throughout the season, particularly the last few games, we've had patches that have been really good and aspects that have been really good, but it's putting it all together now. If we attack like we did in the first half of the last day, plus add the defence we had when we played against Leinster, it's just putting these parts together. I think it would be really hard to stop if we can manage that.
You're leaving us, Nigel, after a very, very long time, part of the furniture at the sports ground in Connacht. So give us a bit of a heads up on that.
Yeah, the dusty old furniture, you have to put it out at some stage. So no, look, William, it's always been part of the plan, to be fair. When I stepped away from the academy and into the professional coaching, I knew there's a shelf life on that, and it's a shelf life of relevance as well. I think you got to keep yourself fresh, and because you got to be fair to your players as well. I said it, with your messaging, it's, it does tend to get watered down after a while, and you could say the same thing, or someone else could say the same thing, and it just brings a kind of a bright spark to the program again. So I just felt myself that I've been a part of this bubble literally for the last 26 years, and at some stage I'd love to come back, and in order to keep that door open, I feel that I need to keep relevant, I need to be fresh, I need to get my eyes open to what else is out there in the rugby world, and I need to be challenged my own views. I said it is, it's in the west of Ireland, it's a small enough bubble, and we see the game through a certain lens, and I just need that challenged as well. And Friendly and Willie have been, it was no surprise to them. I said it's always been part of the plan, and we just feel the time is right.
Is this a no pressure game because it's a knockout game that maybe people will say Connacht won't win this game, or is this the pressure that this is the season now? To some extent, this is what it boils down to. The Pro 14 is gone. The Rainbow Cup is whatever it's going to be. Europe is a real opportunity.
Well, this is chapter 2 of our season, really. Chapter 1's finished. We didn't make that final, which is disappointing. We keep talking about as a squad winning silverware, and we've put ourselves in a position where we're in the top 16. So win 4 games, you win silverware. Or win 5 games, you win silverware. So that would be the intention. Certainly, it's my intention. I know as a collective group of players and coaches, that's our collective intention, that we want to go and win it. So there is pressure on the game. We know that Connacht's form against English sides hasn't been great over the course of history. So we get an opportunity to go and correct that. We know, so we're up against a very formidable side, so it's no mean feat, but we're going there. I want us to have pressure on ourselves, to be honest, to go there and perform, because this is the mark of sides that can show the growth that I believe has taken place here. So, and the other thing is we've talked about the front end. We've got Nigel leaving. One of the things when Nigel said to the players on Friday, fellas, we've still got silverware to win. Well, here's a great opportunity. Let's go and do it. You'd love it for all sorts of reasons, but no more so than for this play.
Okay, and that was some of the highlights of the press conference today. If you want to hear the full press conference, you can go on to patreon.com/CraggyRugby to get the full press conference, to hear what the lads had to say. Of course, you might have to pay a couple of bob for that, as we do try and raise a little bit of cash to make sure we can keep this podcast going. So all and any help is appreciated. So thanks to everyone who has signed up to our Patreon site up to now. So, Finlay, you probably know Nigel better than all of us, as you've been covering Connacht and he's been there for so long. So it's sad day for Connacht.
Yeah, let's just not mention how many years. No, look, Nigel is, the epitome of what you would like every Connacht person to be. He was a good player, great player, played for Connacht, great servant. He's a player anyone would want on their team. He went into coaching, and obviously he's been very successful at it. I think he took, even not just with setting up the academy and what he's done with Connacht, but also with the Ireland under-20s, who I think he took to a World Cup final, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And then he's moved into the senior coach role. Apart from the fact that he's developing as a coach, he's also a very nice person. He's a Galwegian, played with Galwegians Rugby Club, and he has given so much to Galwegians and to Connacht Rugby that his time he really does need for himself to move on and to develop as a coach. Now, I know he's taken the best out of what coaches have been here. The likes of Pat Lamb with his certainly developed, his attacking game. Andy Friends come in with a similar attacking game that Nigel has adapted and is growing. And to have more ambitions, he does need to travel. I'm sure we all do that in every single job we're at. We have to go out and experience, other things. He said himself that, he needs to be challenged in a different environment. He needs to be challenged so that he's not seeing everything through green. Even today he referred to the fact that Connacht, sort of have developed and grown with that chip on their shoulder, and sometimes that's what Connacht needs to make them fight even harder. So he needs to change. He needs to open up his eyes to the way the game is played in other teams, and how it's coached in other teams, and obviously other countries. And one could see him going on he's the type of person, he's got a young family, and it's obviously it's difficult when you have to move your family somewhere. It might be across the world. I could see him, quite frankly, going to New Zealand. I think he would be a perfect fit there, and he'd have a lot of contacts there. Mm-hmm. But he's got a young family, and it's probably a good time for him to go, because they're also very adaptable when they're young, before they have to, move to go to college and choose colleges and things like that. So I think it's a great move. I think it's a great move for him. I think it's a great move for his family. I'm sure they'll, thoroughly enjoy it. Possibly his parents may not, and the rest of their families may not, depending on where it is. We're also told he's quite, he quite likes France. So, we just don't know where he's going. But he will be sorely missed. And I'm sure, that he will come back and will be an ideal candidate when he gets that experience to come back to coach Connacht.
Yeah, good stuff. William, your thoughts?
Yeah, I second everything Lindley says there. Bishman, school I went to, somewhat after me. He's a good deal younger than me. Lucky him. I think it's a good move. I think he's very honest today. He talked about going stale and seeing things through green eyes and needing to learn different things and to expand his knowledge. We're very lucky. I love doing the coach interviews that we do after the teams are announced. We rotate all the coaches around. They all get a turn. They all put a lot of time into that for us. But Nigel is always good to talk to. And it's interesting to do that interview at that stage of the week. And I've always enjoyed talking to him. And, when you bump into him, when we used to be able to go to away matches, yes, which now seems like something from a different age, you could just have a chat in general about stuff and also about rugby. So we wish him well. And he's still got a big job. Connacht have a lot of rugby to play this season, and he'll be a central part of that.
Just when you're talking about that, when I just remembered a time, I think you were with me, might have been an end of year function for Connacht, and we were chatting to him. It must have been after Kieran Keane was leaving. And his name had obviously been mentioned by quite a few people as a likely replacement. And I think we were chatting to him, and he made it very clear at that stage that he wasn't ready to take on that job of head coach. I think he realizes himself that, as you say, those green eyes need to be opened up to maybe blue or yellow or even black.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the mark of the man. I think very tempting, if you were offered it just to grab it. But we've talked about this before. Head coach is a very complex role. There's an awful lot going on that's different to coaching one specific part. And I think it'll be great when he does come back to Connacht, and I'm sure he will.
I'm sure he will, and we wish him all the best. We'll certainly miss him here on the Craggy Crew and the Connacht Clan are certainly going to miss him. Okay, before we start talking about the Leicester game, Lindy, you've got a quick injury update for us. We know the long-term injuries are still long-term and no movement there, but there's a couple of fresh injury updates.
Yeah, just one, and that's Jack Ainger, who has a neck injury and is rehabbing at the moment. His return to play will not be determined until later this week. And then we've got 3 players coming back. Some of them could be back this week. We're not really sure, but over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we have Conor Dean, who had a shoulder injury. We had Sean O'Brien and Turner Holleran with a quad. So that's some good news on the injury front.
Excellent. So, Leicester. One of the titans of English rugby. They've got one of the biggest grounds, Danny, in England. Is that correct?
They've got the biggest rugby ground in England. So a single-purpose rugby ground.
Outside Twickenham, obviously.
Yes, but Twickenham, again, hosts... Yeah, Twickenham is the main stand, but club rugby.
Wow. And we're not going to be there. Just so frustrating. It's just so annoying, and the fans obviously feel the same way, and I'm sure the Leicester fans are sort of wondering what sort of team Connacht would be bringing over, and because they do struggle against Irish teams. Am I right, Danny? My recollection that the likes of Munster have gone over there and won games, and Ulster always give them a hard time.
Yeah, all the other provinces actually played Leicester at some point. Most recently, it was Ulster. Beat them twice, home and away, in the Champions Cup in 2018-2019.
Right. Okay. So, So it's going to be a heck of a challenge, William. They're on their way back. They've got Steve Borthwick, who's a highly rated coach. They've come out of the doldrums of the Jordan Murphy era, and they seem to be playing a bit better rugby these days.
Yeah, I think it's a big ask for Connacht, this one. I think they are on the way back. They're nowhere near the side they were. This was a side that won 6 or 7 premierships, Heineken Cups, Martin Johnson, Leicester stalwart, England stalwart, World Cup winner. That was when they were absolutely flying high. The last 2 seasons, they finished in the bottom 2 of the premiership, nearly got relegated. Would have been relegated last year, other than the fact that Saracens were so far off the mark after their problems. And it's been a slow rebuild for them. They have brought in players. We're going to hear later on today from Steve Borthwick at their press conference. He talks a lot about going game to game and rebuilding what they're looking for. And they're a very typical, I've watched a few of their games now. They're what I would call a typical English Premiership side. They're very big, they're very physical, their line out works well, their scrum. They don't play much rugby in their own half. But what they do, the Premiership is looked upon sometimes, I think, as quite a dour product. It's not. There's actually quite a lot of tries scored. There are some amazingly high scoring games. And they seem to be able to win both ways. They have had some wobbles this season. Their discipline is an issue. They've had a lot of yellow cards, a lot of red cards. Very fiery game last Sunday against Newcastle, which was not quite like old-fashioned rugby, but it wasn't far off. Bit of a problem beforehand when the players were going down the tunnel, which is all a bit handbags, but it's something you just don't see now.
I'm sure Dean Richards had nothing to do with that.
Well, Steve Borthwick today wasn't really interested in discussing it. He just wanted to refer to the fact that Ellis Genge then went onto the pitch and played out of his skin, which he did. They're taking this very seriously. They see a home quarter final against Newcastle or the Ospreys. I think the Ospreys will win that pretty handily. I think Newcastle have a lot on their plate at the moment. That would be a big English-Welsh clash. But they have to get past Connacht first, and they're not dismissing Connacht. He was fairly effusive about what he's seen. I'd expect him to. He's not going to sit there and say they're no good, we're going to beat them. He's not setting himself up for that. But Connacht have played so many of these games in England. I'm very fortunate. I've actually seen them win a game in England at Worcester and draw a game in England at Worcester.
Yeah.
But trips to Newcastle.
Actually, before you move on, Lindley, were you at that Northampton game that Connacht won back in 96, 97? I can never quite remember.
It was. I think Nigel was playing in that too, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think he scored a try. I do remember scoring a try. It was, and that was did the double on Northampton that year, if I'm right.
It was a remarkable result, given Northampton's pedigree at the time. And I always remember it was Matt Dawson was the scrum half for them, and I remember when they played in Connacht, they were quite dismissive of Connacht, and I was very unimpressed actually with their I suppose very unimpressed with their arrogance and their dismissiveness of Connacht. The fact that they won, it was sort of one-off kind of, but the attitude completely changed when Connacht went over there and did the double on them. And I have to say, I was impressed with the way that they accepted it that day. It was like, okay, we have been beaten twice by a better team on this occasion. Did it mean as much to them as it meant to Connacht? Possibly not. But I think that was really the start of Connacht's sort of European sojourn, where Connacht knew how far we could get against English teams.
Yeah, because that was under Warren Gatland, wasn't it? And it was funny. I'm just realising that one of the reasons they might have been so dismissive in the first game was the previous season. So, in the 96-97 season, they'd lost to Northampton. Connacht had lost 31-11 to Northampton, but then in the 97-98 season, as I found my stats, they bet them at home 43-13, which is a hell of a hammering. It's the best score Connacht have ever done against an English side. Danny can double check that for me and tell me if I'm wrong. But to have done that and then to go away in the second last game, and everything was on the line in that game to win that game was incredible. And yes, Nigel scored. But anyway, back to Leicester. As you say, William, we haven't done all that well in the last little while. Okay, Danny, go.
Well, I just want to jump on that. I'd have to agree with what Borthwick is looking at. Like, we actually have similar defences. So, as in, both teams have an 87% success rate for tackles this season. Now, Connacht have made more, but both teams can kind of have a little bit of a leak. But Connacht have made 117 clean breaks to Leicester's 82. And Connacht have beaten 290 defenders, and Leicester's only beaten 240. So Leicester do have a bit of a trouble in attack. Yes, they do like to play in the right areas, but I think Connacht are going to be looking to go and play and possibly get them wide like they did against Scarlets.
Sounds like there's an attack coach needed in Leicester, and a certain Mr. Carolan might be available.
Yeah, I think the point is that they don't do much in their own half. Steve Borthwick today talked about the fact that Connacht were scoring tries from their own 22 against the Scarlets. He made that point. He talked about the game at Leinster where Connacht got the squeeze on early and got points. He also talked about them doing that against Munster. He didn't follow up and say a better team would have got more scores in that 15 minutes. Connacht got one try and a conversion. There was plenty of other. That's what he's looking at. And that's why I think they're taking this game hugely seriously, because they're not good enough at the moment to just feel, well, we're better than Connacht. And that's going to be the challenge for Connacht. What seems to have happened, if you look at results recently in games, we've been at games. Going back a bit, you had the likes of Bath, Harlequins, Gloucester. We've been to Gloucester again since, Anya, all that sort of stuff. That has got us tight games. They don't lose many games by huge margins. Sides don't tear us apart. Saracens have done us. Exeter, Newcastle a few years ago, London Irish. Those days are over. But it's just the key moments of the game. Can they get them right? And my slight concern is that we've lost 3 on the bounce. I don't think that's a good way to ever go into a sort of a knockout game. You want to be winning. Winning's a great habit. You find a way to win. Just slightly lacking. The season has finished in the Pro 14 8-8. Should have probably been 10-6. The best performance was actually the loss away to Munster, because that was a very tough game. Edinburgh, the red card, the Scarlets game. I don't know what can you say. It was utterly baffling. But interesting today that Paul Boyle, Andy Friend both referenced the fact defensively Connacht were poor right through that game. It wasn't just the second half. And he also talked about the red penalties, 9 of them. He said every penalty that Connacht gave away was a red penalty, 8 of them in the second half. If they do that against Leicester, they're gone, because George Ford moves that ball up and down the touchline and kicks goals for fun. And that's a huge challenge. They've got to make sure that they don't get involved in a penalty scenario. And
talking about that, like we've had a change of referee. We were supposed to have a French referee, but now we're going to have a Pro 14 referee. Now maybe that's something we can I'll have a look at back through the stats to see if we've ever played an English team with a Pro 14 referee. I don't believe we have. It's always been a French referee in my, looking back, but I'd have to go and confirm that. And that should change things, because that means this referee will know us, and there'll be it'll just be and of course the Pro 14 is refereed slightly differently than the English Premiership.
Yeah, Steve Borthwick again. I mean, I couldn't resist bringing that up with him, and he gave a very, very diplomatic, very, very good answer actually about the fact that you just have to get on.
Do you know what? Before you talk about it, let's hear what he said.
I think it's always one of the challenges you have in Europe. You've got to adapt as a referee in the game. The laws are the same, interpretations might be slightly different, but then you've got to adapt, and it's always the way one of the teams quickest to adapt. It will usually, ultimately you want to be the team that's quickest to adapt. Simple as that.
Yeah, that was good, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, because I think they are probably not very amused by this, because it's very odd that they couldn't find another French referee. And now we're getting, they will feel this is a Pro 14 referee. He's not a very experienced referee either. And it is refereed differently. The laws are the same. That's the point he made, but their interpretations. The other big difference, TMOs in the Premiership operate differently to TMOs in the Pro 14. They seem to take over the decision making. They seem to make a lot more of the calls. The referee almost gives it over to them. And the referee on Sunday for them against Newcastle didn't have a very good game, I felt. And he lost. The TMO was really making these decisions around the edges. And I think that's very tricky for players, because they can't talk to the TMO. They can only talk to the referee. And they were all talking, which is another issue for another day. It used to just be the captain.
Well, that's up to the ref. The ref can easily stop that. He just turns around and says, I'm only talking to the captain. That really is down to me. That's down to the ref. That's one thing I would say about referees. If there's too much chat on the field, stop it. It's very easy to stop it, because you say to them, next person who talks, you give a penalty away. You give the penalty away and everyone shuts up. And that, to me, is a huge part of the game that needs to be brought back in, that referees need to take a little bit more control. It's not that you're sort of being a school teacher or anything. You're just trying to get the game played. Okay, we've been talking a lot about the Leicester coaches, but they've got one heck of a squad there, Lindley. They seem to have internationals all over the place.
Yeah, they do. And the biggest worry, I think, facing Connacht is going to be that the strength of that pack and their forward. I mean, depending on who they put in there, if you've got a front row with, Tom Young's the former Lion, and you've got Dan Coles and you've got Alice Genge, then you have a formidable front row that Connacht is going to have to deal with, And then outside him, of course, you've got George Ford, who just kicks points for fun. I think, was it 16 points he kicked, in the last match, and despite the fact that they had 2 sitting bins, I think they still survived quite handily, So I think it's recognised, and I think Andy Friend is recognising, I think everyone in Connacht recognise that this is going to come down to how Connacht withstand that pack and how they deal with that pack. Look, Connacht have been dealt a little bit of a blow with the loss of 3 key players. And when you look at those key players, Bundy, obviously, in the back line, this kind of almost like a spiritual leader who gets everybody going and pumps everybody up, leaves nothing behind him. You've got Jared Butler, who's the example on the pitch, who also deals quietly and efficiently, now with referees. But biggest of all possibly is Quinn Roux and his sheer power and his experience. And I think how he is held in pretty high esteem in the rugby world for the work that he does in that pack. And I think without those 3 players, it has just made, no matter, we all know that there are replacements, et cetera, of good quality. But I think without those 3 key players, I think it's a really, really big ask for Connacht. And I would be very afraid. Now, I know Connacht dealt with it, I guess, when Andy Friend referred to the Munster match, and having that Connacht have learnt from that first Munster match how to deal with that rolling maul and how to, how and that is possibly how they're going to play this match similar to Munster. So I think that was probably a very valuable learning curve. And as Andy Friend says, they want to keep the ball moving. They want to have to move them around the park. And that's the way they're going to play the game. So it really comes down to a match of 2 different styles.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And just Danny, before you just jump in there, you've been lucky enough to train with somebody who might be playing, who's Nemani Nandolo, who's monster winger. Like, he's bigger than most forwards. But you managed to get training against him once, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. It was before Ireland played Fiji in Dublin. I was playing rugby with Monkstown in Dublin, and our coach was good friends with the guys in Blackrock. They asked, could 3 guys come down training? I was one of the lucky guys to come down. Now, they sent 2 flankers and a back row. And I was 6'2" and 105 kilos, and the second row was 6'6" and 115, and we all looked small. They all thought we were backs. It was a lot of fun to train with those guys. We didn't go hammer and tongs in a full on match, but we got to do a few line outs against them, jump in doing some scrums with them, but. It was a great experience. What was the best thing about it was they were all playing with smiles on their faces. No matter what they were doing fitness, they had smiles on their faces. It was always just a smile on their face, and their skills were unbelievable. And Nandolo, he was actually a guy that we got a picture with. And he made us all look small. It really did. He looks more like a prop than a winger.
Well, if you send me on that photo, I'll tweet it out after the pod goes out, so people can see that this is a winger standing beside Irish forwards. I see one of the names that's after popping up to me as I look at their list is Johnny Mcphillips, who obviously left Ulster and ended up at Leicester. I think he was on the bench last week. It'll be fascinating to see if yet another Irish out half turns up and starts playing rugby in England again.
Yeah, the Irish player I'm interested in is Dan Kelly. He played 12 last week against Newcastle. The rumour mill would suggest that Connacht maybe tried to sign this guy last year. Under 20s player. He looks a bit a bit special. He was very important in that game because he took a lot of the heavy hits, but he's a very good offloader. He's also made 2 tackle saving tries. I think he's a key part of the way they're going to set up. If he plays, we don't know.
He's only 19. I'm only just looking him up. He's only 19. Like, he has played for Ireland, but he's English born, yeah.
And he comes from a rugby league background as well,
right.
Which is really interesting. And I think Connacht are going to have to play like they did against Munster, but they're going to have to play as well, if not better, than when they played Leinster. That's going to be the key. It's score. You've got to score in this game. You won't outmuscle them. You won't do a hang on and win. You've got to play for 80 minutes, which is something that maybe hasn't been happening. It certainly didn't happen against the Scarlets, and that's, you know, people will. I think Leicester will just go about their business the way they go about it. And Connacht have got to try to avoid getting too carried and hung up in that. The key players for me actually are the 6, Hanno Liebenberg, and 8, Jasper Wiese. Wiese, another player that Connacht looked very closely at, played. We've seen him here. He looks a far better player now. He looks a lot fitter than he ever did coming up here for the Cheetahs, when he always looked as if he was carrying a few pounds. He doesn't look that now. Rough, tough guy, just back from a 4-match ban, got a yellow card on Sunday, might have been slightly more, but he can go either side of the scrum with a pickup, and he makes a lot of those decisions himself. It's not pre-planned. He just decides, I think. And Connacht know what's coming, and it's whether they can deal with it and then get their own game away is going to be the key to this game on Saturday evening in what would normally be a jam-packed Welford Road.
Yes.
But obviously there's going to be 200 people there, not fans, 200 people in total in what is quite a big ground.
That probably, you know, kind of negates hopefully a little bit of you know, the home crowd and their influence on the game, and hopefully evens it up a little bit more. I think the first, and I think Andy Friend said something today about the first 20 minutes, and I think that's going to be really critical. I think Connacht have shown they're quite capable when they're on song of playing a very confident game of rugby, and I think if they can play that game, they can use the likes of John Porch to give them some go forward ball running from deep if he gets the ball, especially out to Watton on the wings, then I think they will gain confidence with every time they get through a play, every time they attack. My fear is if the defence, depending on the defence of Leicester, and if they get frustrated with the fact that they are pushed back and they are stopped from getting good go forward ball, that's my main fear. I think if Connacht can be totally energetic, put everything into it, they have to be clinical as well, of course, and they have to play a little bit smart. I think they have every opportunity, but I think, you know, obviously the odds are definitely with the home side.
They certainly are. Danny, your thoughts on the chances of Connacht at the weekend? Leicester are only 5-point favourites at the moment, which is, I was surprised it was so low, but what do you think?
Yeah, you got to look at that like saying, yeah, they're at home. They've got a good home record this season. But Connacht have a good attack. Like in the Pro 14, Connacht have scored 53 tries, and in the Premiership, Leicester have conceded 39. You know, so Connacht have, and they've only scored 34. So Connacht know how to score tries. And something that you mentioned, William, is that Connacht not being in the game for 80 minutes. Something that Leicester seem to be, it from looking at the stats, I haven't watched that many games, but looking at the stats, you know, in the second half of the game against Newcastle, they only had 20% territory. You know, they only had against Exeter in the first half, it was again 20%. You know, like they seem to be on top. If they're on top, they are on top. But if they're not on top, they are so far off it, because they only have an overall territory for the last 5 games of 47%. in and around the halfway. So like that's, but it's a lot of swings and roundabouts. So in the first half, it's either high or it's really low. So it'll be about taking chances.
Okay, it certainly sounds like everyone thinks we have a chance, but are not overly confident of a win. So in the last couple of minutes before we end the podcast, let's have a quick rundown as to who we think might be playing for Connacht, or can we, there might be a couple of places that you'd wonder who might be playing. Like scrum half is the obvious one, but I'm assuming most of the pack picks itself, with possibly the hookers, you'd probably start with Dave Heffernan. What do you think? I'm assuming Buckley and Beelum are starting, by the way.
Yeah, and I think Dave Heffernan would be pretty important for them, scrummaging wise. Ulton Delan, Gavin Thornbury, your second rows. Back row is going to be interesting because I think they're going to have a lot of work on. Paul Boyle will definitely be there. Owen Masterson tends to think his way very well through a game.
Mm-hmm.
And I suspect Conor Oliver will be the 7. He's abrasive. He just needs to watch his penalties.
He does. Lindley, what do you think at scrum half then? Are you going to pick Carolan or are you going to pick Kieran?
I think Karen Blade is probably at the moment appears to have that number 1 shirt to a certain degree, but I personally would go with Kieran Marmion, and the reason I say that is because I think with such a strong, my opinion is that with such a strong pack and a possible not as much go forward ball, that I think we need a really some swift passing and a little bit more dynamism in the scrum half position where Carolan is extremely solid. I think Kieran Marmion's passing is just that little bit slick. He's a little bit faster to the ball. That's just my personal opinion. But it's a toss-up really, isn't it?
And then, Liam, assuming you're going to pick Jack at out half, I don't think there's any question there, is there?
No, not at all. He picks himself.
He does. He picks himself. Centres, William, were you saying there was word of Peter Robb coming back? Because we could be a bit light at centre if he isn't.
Well, I think he's back training, but he's not on the injury list.
Right.
So you can never be 100% sure that means that they're available. I think they'll have to look at him because we are a bit stuck at centre at the minute. And it was a problem defensively. It was a problem against the Scarlets, and I've mentioned Dan Kelly already. Is a very difficult proposition, I think. Now he may not play as well next week as he did last week, but he seems an integral part of their what they're at. They'll probably go and pick players we didn't see last Sunday. Now blow the whole thing out of the water. Tom Daly will be there.
And then back three, Danny. You're big friends with Packy. Full back and all that, so you must know all about the full back and wingers and stuff like that.
Well, to be honest, I think the back three kind of picks itself of Porch, Wootton and Healy. I'd be looking at that just purely for Healy's defence compared to the second, or the most popular back three that we've picked this season was Porch, Sullivan and Wootton. The second was Porch, Wootton, Healy. I think Healy comes in because he's just got that better defensive mind than Sullivan does at the moment. I do think Sullivan is one he's learning, but I do think Healy will get the nod.
Fair enough. And then what's the bench going to be? It's going to be an interesting bench. Are we going to do a 6-2 bench, or are we just going to go with our normal bench? You'd have someone like Conor Fitzgerald on the bench to cover the centres. So is that? I know at the training session I saw a couple of weeks back, that's what happened when they brought Conor onto the field and Jack didn't move. He stayed in the 10 spot. Conor had to drift out into the centre. Because again, we're a bit light in the backs.
Well, there's also Sean O'Brien.
Sean Garrett O'Brien now we're talking, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure of, obviously, I'm not sure of the fitness of Peter Robb. So we don't know. So Sean O'Brien could be a possible starter as well. So it depends on how fit, Peter Robb is, whether he starts from the bench or whether he starts, from the start.
I think Conor Fitzgerald might cover centre. It would be very unusual for Connacht to go 6-2 on the bench. It's something that we haven't seen. But this might be the type of game because it's going to be hard. I don't know what the weather forecast is going to be like. There was a hell of a
pretty
wind.
Pleasant at the moment. Pretty pleasant as things stand. It's should be a reasonable evening.
Because there was a wind blowing there last Sunday, which actually affected the game quite a lot. It was swirling around because it's quite an enclosed ground with fairly sort of big stands. I think it could be a dour old struggle, but I can't see Connacht going that way. So I think it'll be a fairly standard one. I would probably see Jordan Duggan, Shane Delahunt, Dominic Robertson, McCoy. I think as the game breaks up a bit, he might be key to actually doing some ball carrying. I can see a role for Abraham Papaili in this game, not starting, but I could see him being important again towards the end because it's never going to be anything less than a full-on physical battle.
Yeah.
And we haven't really discussed this, but Connacht aren't going to win this by a big margin. It's going to be a tight game, so they have to keep at it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen in the past games, a couple of times away to Gloucester, where it just they haven't been able to keep it going. Northampton a few years ago in a bizarre playoff game for a European place. So the bench is going to be absolutely huge here, and they have to come on and get at it straight away. Second row cover Niall Murray, I think.
And you've got Sean Masterson as well, remember?
Yeah.
Sean be quite on the bench, I think.
Well, he's also he might be the starter at 7.
Yeah, he's pretty abrasive. He's a very abrasive lad.
Yeah.
And,
Did very well against Racing.
Okay, all right. So looks like a solid enough team. We'll find out later in the week, and we'll have another mini pod where William interviews the coaches. I can ask them about the selections that we get, and we'll have that out later on in the week. So I'd like to thank everyone. That was a good chat tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Just before we go, I want to confirm. Yeah, Northampton, the 43-13 win was the highest that we've scored against an English team.
Thank you, Dan. I knew you'd find it for me. Okay, so we'll finish off with William trying to make sense of the final weeks of the Pro 14 season, because I think it's still going on, even though the final's already been played. But here's William with the tables, the results, and any other fixtures that might be still outstanding for the Pro 14. Bye, folks.
The final weekend of action in the Guinness Pro 14, and on Saturday, March the 27th, it finished Glasgow Warriors 46, Benetton 25, and the playoff final, Leinster 16, Munster 6. And the final live action of this year's Guinness Pro 14 was on Sunday, March the 28th. It finished Dragons 24, Edinburgh 17. That left one unplayed match between Edinburgh and Benetton, and the Pro 14 have announced that game is permanently cancelled. It has been awarded to Edinburgh, and thus the Pro 14 season is complete, with all teams having been designated as playing 16 games. Let's have a quick look at what that does to the final tables. In Conference A, Leinster first, Ulster second, Ospreys third, all of them direct to the European Champions Cup next season. Glasgow Warriors fourth, Dragons fifth, and Zebre sixth. In Conference B, first Munster, second Connacht, third Scarlets, fourth Cardiff, fifth Edinburgh, and Benetton on the bottom. Sad end for them. Effectively played 16, won none, and lost 16. Next weekend, attention switches to Europe, and on Easter Saturday, April the 3rd, in the European Challenge Cup, the game for Connacht is Leicester Tigers versus Connacht at 8 p.m. Also in the European Challenge Cup, on Easter Sunday, the 4th of April, the final game of the European weekend, Harlequins versus Ulster, who are playing their first ever Challenge Cup game. That kicks off at 8 p.m. On Friday, April the 2nd, Leinster are play Toulon at 5:30 p.m. And on Saturday, April the 3rd, Munster play Toulouse at 3 p.m. The latter two games in the European Champions Cup.
Loose, cut it loose. Break out or nothing changes. Sad and confused. Don't wait until